To this, welcome to this meeting of Community Development Services. I do have a late apology from Councillor Wharehinga. He's woken up pretty crook, so he's an apology. So we go straight to the confirmation of the non-confidential minutes. Moved by Councillor Burdett, seconded by Councillor McLean. Any matters arising? Okay. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Any matters from the action sheet?
I can provide an update on the first item.
Sorry. Yeah.
So the artworks, we're consulting with Derek Lardelli, and the artwork, it has been passed over to him, and he hasn't got back to us yet. So okay. I'll follow up, but it's definitely with him.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, we've got the museum here, so that's right. Township plans and everything. Okay, if there's nothing there, and we've got the governance work plan there, if there's anything about that. Okay, that seems all good. Oh, well, we'll welcome Nisbet Smith here, who's going to give us something on the natural burials. Welcome, Nisbet. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou, ko Nisbet Smith taku ingoa, and thanks for the invite from this committee to speak to you around the kaupapa of natural burials. I'm here on behalf of both Natural Burials Tairāwhiti, a small local group that has formed, and Natural Burials New Zealand, which is based in Wellington. And I'm here to advocate for a natural burial location in the GDC Tairāwhiti Rohi. I'd like to start with a rhetorical question to the committee. What do electric scooters, organic food production, Bitcoin, and natural burials have in common? Okay, I'll answer that for you. They're all ideas whose time has come. Even if that is in an evolutionary sense, they may be ideas that we first heard of and thought, not quite sure if that's going to work in our community or our economy, but in time they have become part of the fabric of the society, and we have accepted them and we have evolved with them as our communities interact with those ideas and vice versa. So quite often when we hear of a new idea, we recoil. There's a little bit of kind of how is that going to work in our community? And it just takes time for some of those new ideas to be embedded. More importantly, they give us choices around how we want to live, how we want to express our lives. Just like gay marriage and shared cycle paths, our perceptions have changed over time, unless our name, of course, happens to be Mike Hosking. What may start with a sense of skepticism eventually and inevitably becomes part of the fabric of the society we live in, and they don't raise eyebrows anymore. Now, natural burials are not only a way of the future, they are in fact a way of the past. There was no community on Earth 150 years ago that did not practice natural burials. It was just part of who we were as communities and societies. It's been going on for tens of thousands of years. And it's only in relatively recent times that we have come up with the concept of embalming, really since the discovery of formaldehyde in the 1880s and 1900s. The actual term embalming refers to the use of balm, the use of herbs, which were used to preserve a body so that people could go through the grieving and mourning process. Honey was used in the past, even alcohol. Lord Nelson was brought back from Trafalgar to London in a barrel of brandy. Bloody waste of good alcohol as far as I'm concerned. Alexander the Great was preserved in a cask of honey. But with the price of Manuka honey export at the moment, we won't go there. Times have changed, and the perceptions of death and how we deal with these processes has also changed. For instance, we no longer see huge monuments in cemeteries. I mean, how long since someone has had one of those enormous monoliths built that we see at Makaraka and at the far end of Taruheru? We just don't do that anymore. Our whole perception has changed, and we're into the lawn cemetery thing. Unfortunately, that also means we get the flashing neon lights and the whirligigs. But again, that's a cultural expression, and it's important for some people. And a new and significant proportion of the population have come up with a tradition, and is it a tradition or is it a new concept of an environmental way of living? And that's a personal and deeply integrated environmental concept. And their desire for how their bodies are dealt with in an afterlife reflects that. So natural burials basically means no embalming, natural materials only used in the concept. That could be shrouds, it could be flax, for instance, harakeke, all things that break down in the soil. And burial at a depth where microbial activity is active. In other words, not 6 feet down in clay, which has no microbial activity. It's in a higher level where there is active, and compost can be added back in as well. For me personally, the concept of a formaldehyde end to my life is an absolute anathema. Why would I contaminate groundwater with my last active life? I mean, that to me is totally ridiculous. I think a lot of people think like that, and cremation has become quite a big thing. But unfortunately, with the instruments we have now, we know that a 5-kilometre radius of a cremation site is contaminated with mercury. And that's because as kids, we all had mercury fillings. That gets vaporized and spreads across the landscape. So they are choices which will remain and must remain, but we need a third choice, and that is natural burials. Again, for me personally, I carry with me right now 100 trillion living microbes. That is who I am. And I don't want those to be killed off in the process of burial. For me, that is the afterlife, the passing on of that biologically active person. Anyway, enough about me. Gisborne people have clearly indicated their desire for natural burials through the 42 submissions that came in favour in the draft cemetery plan. Some advantages to council: cheaper land purchase for a start. If we do go down the land purchase track, we're looking at probably land in a rural valley rather than high quality horticultural land on the Poverty Bay Plains. The other factor of that is that we've got another 2-3 billion mouths to feed in all of our lifetimes. We can't afford to lose good horticultural land to cemeteries. Much reduced running costs. We don't have to be spraying and manicuring all of those lawns. Carbon credits can come back to the council. I know you all say, well, carbon credits are worth nothing, $20 a tonne. They will be $85 a tonne very, very quickly once Canada enacts that within its national plan. So there could be money coming back to council to pay for these natural cemeteries. Returning some rural land to natural forest, maybe a valley that needs to be regenerated into natural forest, nothing too steep, obviously, because we don't want erosion, but you could have a reduced risk of runoff and a beautiful piece of farmland or valley returning to natural forest. And potentially the revenue from out-of-town people wishing to be buried in a natural site as well. I personally think your charges are too low at the moment. We don't want to go through the roof with charges, but it could well be a revenue gathering exercise in that people may choose to come to Gisborne for burial. I lived in Bahrain for 5 years, and that was known as the Garden of Eden 2,000 years ago. It's a desert now, but it was the Garden of Eden, the real Garden of Eden. And they've got burial sites from all over the Middle East. Tens of thousands of people came to be buried in Bahrain, and that was what it was known for and still is. It's very, very famous for its burial sites. Not that we want tens of thousands here, but by offering alternative, we could draw people to Gisborne. So in conclusion, what is there not to like about this concept? It has a lot of very, very good concepts that will work in with Council's future. And I call on Council to take up the initiative on this ancient and futuristic concept and initiate a natural burial site in this region. Kia ora and thank you.
Thanks very much, Nisbet. You stay there. We can. Some of the committee may have questions of you. Yeah, that is. No, that's very interesting, Nisbet. Something that I wasn't sure about was is some of the appeal with natural burials that they can be buried in a place of their choosing. You know, a lot of people would like to be in a site that overlooks a...
That's an area that's being talked about quite a lot at the moment. I believe there is a Law Commission paper about to come out or recently come out, and it deals with some of those issues. A lot of people say, I'd like to be buried in a little family urapa in the corner of our farm, perhaps, or something like that. At the moment, I believe that has to be signed off by the Minister of Internal Affairs. I'm sure Andrew knows the law around that better than I do. But this Law Commission paper does open up some possibilities there. It's probably something Council doesn't want to get into, where it's totally unregulated and there's a plot in someone's backyard and, you know, a main street in town. That could get a little bit messy. Yeah. But I think this Law Commission paper does look at people choosing sites. I believe at the moment, if your site is 30 kilometres from a main centre, then you do have the capacity to choose a burial site on a farm or in a rural location, family land, what have you.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, okay.
The other question I had was, what happens above the ground? Do they still have a stone?
In natural burials, not anything formal, as in heavily engraved or what have you. It could be an engraved stone. It could be a wooden plaque, again, of natural timber. It's one of those concepts that gradually returns to the earth as well. There is the possibility of an identifier being a GPS type locator that can last for thousands of years. At the moment, that's not legally required. When I asked Natural Burials New Zealand about this and forensic type evidence, if police wanted to do an autopsy, later on or what have you, they said, well, what happens in cremations? There's no evidence left behind anyway. So that's a matter of choice whether one wishes to have some kind of GPS identifier so that family, and I know there are apps out there now where your whole family history, your whakapapa, can come up on the app when your burial site is located.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nesbitt. When you're buried naturally, are you buried in a coffin?
Yes, it's up to the individual. The coffin has to be of natural materials, so it can't be of MDF board, which again is formaldehyde. It's what this stuff is made of, probably. It never breaks down. It's there for thousands and thousands of years. Well, why would we do that? Why would we pollute the ground with something that's going to hang around for thousands of years? There are precedents locally. Dr. Paratini Nata was buried in a beautiful harakeke woven flax coffin, and there are provision for shrouds and what have you, or recycled cardboard, for instance. But timber is widely used in natural burials, but it is not H1.3 treated timber. And why would it be? Again, it would be arsenic moving into groundwater supplies if we were to do that. When we do that, Thank you very much, everyone. Kia ora.
Okay, we have no leaves of absence or, oh no, we're into extraordinary business. Councillor Foster wants to discuss something after the meeting, so if you can just hold fire just straight after the meeting. Okay, we'll move into our first report, which is Public Convenience Plan for Consultation, page 15. Does someone want to explain to me substandard? 70% of the toilets are substandard, so that wording did disturb me a bit. I think that's a pretty high percentage to be calling our toilets substandard. So. Yeah.
Given we don't have any other volunteers, I'll speak on that one. So we did an assessment several years ago around our public conveniences. Some of the members of the committee may remember we did some strategy work, and in that strategy work we identified what the New Zealand standard for public conveniences in different environments was. So typically in urban environments you will have a higher standard. A, B, I think are the two categories that you would expect for public conveniences in urban environments, down to when you're in truly rural environments, you might have a standard F, which is very low standard and doesn't have running water. Basically could be a long drop standard facility. So from that work, we identified that we should be working in the range of B to D, I think, and actually a lot of our toilets weren't actually meeting those standards. So there is a work program in place around bringing toilets up to those standards.
Andrew earlier about this, long drops, Hexbay Wharf, and in Waipiro below the marae. I don't know who put them in, but both the staff and the contractors should be complimented. The Hexbay Wharf is a marvellous toilet, big tank there to keep it supplied, and a wash station, plus at Waipiro, very good toilet. So it might have taken 10 years, but they're there.
That's excellent, Councillor Bidette, because I've just come back from going around the coast. Started in Opotiki, come all the way back, and I did that same trip 3 weeks ago. So I did make a point of going to the toilets, and I've been even the East Coast Lighthouse, and very impressed with the rural toilets. They're fantastic, you know. Been out to Reri, Hicks Bay, Toko, Tolaga by the Wharf, Hicks Bay, been in all of them, and no complaints with the rural toilets. I think they're doing a fantastic job. A little bit more concerned with the city toilets, I have to say. Yeah.
And well maintained.
And on that maintenance schedule, I do think that the contract for the levels of service should be more along the lines of ongoing maintenance cleaning, which is fine, but there should be an element of 6 monthly spring cleaning, because the only issue I did have with a few toilets, like there is things there you think, well, that's probably not going to be picked up in regular maintenance, just on the time requirements. Probably Reri toilet would be a good point. There was, in one corner, there was a bit of a pile of bird stuff, and obviously it would have taken quite a while to accumulate to that level. So I think, you know, some of those things might be missed in the regular maintenance program, but I think we should look at writing into the contract, okay, we've got a regular maintenance program, but we do need every 6 months a full noise spring cleaning type operation going on to get rid of that sort of more build-up sort of side of keeping them looking flash. Councillor Dowsing?
Thank you. I just had a question about the plan on the page and going forward. You mentioned that a couple of years ago we did some surveying of the sites and collected information. It indicates here that we need another $50,000 spent on a complete assessment of the network of sites. Do we not have that intelligence in-house already, or is our knowledge of our sites poor enough that we need to spend $50,000 on investigation? And if we are spending $50,000 on investigation again, then what are we doing in terms of business intelligence to make sure that we don't have to put investment into ongoing research into our own facilities?
I might ask Mr. Blair to comment if he can. Can you provide any comment on that?
On the cost?
Yeah, the estimate of $50,000 in the budget for investigation into our public convenience stock.
Through the chair, the initial estimate was developed to basically go further than what we've done in the past. So we talked about the New Zealand standard for the assessment of public conveniences, but what we didn't have is a comprehensive maintenance and renewal program. The 50 grand, yes, there is some expertise and staff that could develop that, but whether we could do that in with our current workload is, yeah, it's difficult to ascertain at the moment.
Yeah, I guess the question is more around where in the plan on a page here, it doesn't indicate what you're suggesting it needs to be spent on. It's saying that it's to assess level of service and amenity and quality and compliance with standard, which is what what essentially you said we've just researched in terms of benchmarking against New Zealand standards. Yeah, I'm just not sure why for 73 sites, I think it is $50,000 needs to be applied to just the assessment criteria. And then on top of that, there's sort of the ongoing new design for public conveniences of 25,000, which we've just gone through the process of installing some very current public conveniences. So I would assume that we have a standard. So just again, that 25,000, wondering if the necessity is there for that. In terms of the project overall, I guess the big standout for me is that is the unscheduled maintenance and the cost associated with that, and it is very high. And I guess from my point of view, we really need to. There is a need to invest money in understanding of our public conveniences, but possibly it's not about the scope of what's on site, but actually the scope of our operating costs and how we can reduce that unscheduled maintenance of $188,000 per year. I think there's more benefit to investing in controlling our OPEX than in controlling our CAPEX. It just seems to be where we would save more money.
Through the chair, just comment on that. I see the time frame for that 50,000 as a 21-31 long-term plan. So I think when you go through those bullet points, it would be fair to think that we would have a monetary requirement through that 10-year plan for some of those bullet point options.
Through the chair, the unscheduled costs for public conveniences, it does take into account all the R&M that we need to do on the asset. So we are dealing with a declining asset in terms of our public convenience network. Now we are carrying out replacements as budget allows, and that's what you've seen up the coast, and it's been to great effect with good quality facilities that are quite low maintenance and easy to maintain. What we're also combating is vandalism, and that is quite a tough issue that we find in our public conveniences. So yeah, there is that unscheduled cost, but it's definitely something that we know is needed. Otherwise we would have a poorer level of service and poorer quality of assets.
What proportion of the 180,000 would be, you'd say, would be caused by vandalism?
That would be difficult to bring to the table without doing the proper investigation, but we do have quite a bit, and a lot of it stems in the city toilets, and it's to the, you know, it's graffiti, it's writing on walls, it's, you know, systems being smashed. So it's really unsavoury behaviour, and you know, I would say a lot of those costs in the R&M would be associated to that.
Just as an example, Garrett, do you know what the Sponge Bay toilet cost? Because that was vandalism.
Through the chair, that facility, when it was burnt this time last year, it was about $12,000 to fix that. So it does get up there when we have this type of behaviour going on in the community.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask about the consultation, because if I'm reading this correctly, the plan at a glance is on page 22, but we're talking on page 19 about how we're going to go out to consult, and the whole document is quite comprehensive. So I'd like to see us, the committee, at least have the opportunity to see what is going to be provided, because it's all very well. We're going to have a media release, and then the website's going to have the draft plan, and we're going to have a Facebook page, and the community members to request a hui, which is all good. But I mean, this is quite substantial. So don't we need to distill it down into something that is actually user-friendly for our public, and where we want answers to some questions, because this doesn't actually raise any answers for the public to directly address, I don't believe. It talks about the situation as a whole and the comments that have come up, but it doesn't seem to me that it actually elicits or makes clear what the council's really seeking.
The other issue with the consultation, I was that the end date's the 21st of December, and I thought that most people do hit that consultation quite late in the period, and it's you know, I think it's an inconvenient time to be finishing the consultation.
So in response, we can provide, I guess, a simple fact sheet. So I frequently ask sort of questions in response to provide that clarity around the content, and appreciate it as a comprehensive document. And also we're happy to accommodate an extension if that's what the committee expects.
That sort of data is something we have been criticised for in the past, that when we put these things out like 4 days before Christmas, you know. Yeah.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman, though, doesn't the committee need to understand clearly what the questions are that you want a response from the public on? I mean, this is a general plan, and we can have the public say we like it or we don't, but we actually do need a bit more refined detail if you want people to give you feedback. And the public are much more interested when you suggest that some toilets are going to be taken away or not taken away. We need clarity around that. We understand that there's an ongoing process of improving the quality of the conveniences that are provided for.
Through the chair, so the key issues that we're hoping this plan can address are on page 2 of the main report. So the affordability, ageing facilities, appropriate location and distribution, etc. So the expectation from consultation is, have we got the issues right, and hoping that the consultation will fill in if we've missed anything. But I think my staff have been fairly comprehensive in understanding the issues around public conveniences. We're seeking the feedback from the community around those matters. So the clarity is there in those point 8 on page 2, if that's.
He's very good at telling us in our rural areas anyway around those issues. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got the recommendations on page 15 of this report. Approve the release of the draft of the consultation on 29 November to 1st December. So how
Would an extension to the 21st of January be acceptable?
31st of January. Nobody's going to do anything with it in the first month of January and here anyway.
Okay, any committee fine with that? Okay, so with the adjustment to the 31st of January 2019, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, cemeteries plan for approval, page 45.
Chairman, can I speak to this?
You certainly can.
I was late. My mission in life is to go to monies, but our own, in terms of our own council-owned cemeteries, the question has been asked on a regular basis, why do we not provide poripaka? I know in terms of the public cemeteries, sometimes they're not widely used, but that has been an ongoing issue for a long time. One guy hooked into me because he said, there's what we voluntarily put in place, which is a long drop, and it's used regularly at Tangis. So it's an issue, I think.
Yeah. Should we supply toilets to the cemeteries?
I expect if that was a key issue, we might receive some feedback through consultation on the previous item.
Good point, yep. The actions is a 400K budget. Is that budgeted for at that level?
No.
Oh. Councillor Finn.
Thank you. I just need some clarification. In page 53, risks, number 33, it's got there, there are 3 key risks there, and I see in the table you've only just put 1 risk. Just a bit of clarification, is that a mistake or are there other risks involved there, please?
At the time of writing, I expect those were the risks anticipated, but if there are, at the time of writing, I anticipate those were the risks considered. If we haven't comprehensively considered all risks.
You haven't got another risk in the back of your
Is
mind,
there...
have you? No. No.
I'd suggest it was an iteration issue in the preparation of the report. So these reports go through a long process of being prepared to be as good as possible for committee.
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I thought, first of all, that there was a tremendous response around eco burials, and I was really surprised to see that. I didn't realise there'd be quite so many passionate people, but when I hear about it spoken, I hear it spoken about this morning, I kind of want one now. But I think the big submission that stood out to me was the one from Runga Whakaata Iwi Trust. And there's some really big issues raised in that. And I'd really like some more feedback from council officers on the history of that from council's point of view. But there's mention of a potential joint management agreement for those areas within that submission. And I think that's something that may want to be pursued. I would certainly advocate for that. I assume everyone got to that submission. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so yeah. I mean, I think that's there should be a separate paper essentially produced around that submission, because it does raise some very interesting historic issues for the council and something that we should be addressing.
In response there, that submission, so with a wider context, there is the wider governance to governance Runga Whakaata relationship that we've been working with Runga Whakaata Iwi Trust on. And currently we're trying to work on a meeting between the wider council and the trust themselves. And council officers are working through matters that could be topics of discussion at that meeting, and highly likely that this could be one of them that is discussed at that point. In lieu of a paper until that meeting happens, it could be helpful that at that level this matter is discussed at a governance to governance relationship, rather than us, I guess, providing some context. But obviously before that meeting we would support councillors with that context, so you're not going in without any information.
So supplementary then, I guess, if it's a governance to governance meeting, we have council on the 13th of December, perhaps an invitation to meet with us post-council on the 13th?
Yes, that's been a date proposed with Runga Whakaata. I understand they had an AGM on Sunday, and we're discussing the matter there. So we haven't had confirmation on that side yet, but hold the date.
I mean, Watson Park's going to be covered under different headlines, isn't it, as opposed to cemeteries? Yeah. Councillor Foster.
Questions too. On page 118, it's about ash interment areas. Could be a capacity within 5 years. Do we have plans in place, for expansion of those areas or alternative areas?
I might need to default to my staff on a technical matter such as ash internment, or I might need to come back to
Just
you
bearing in mind that
to give you an acceptable answer.
The ash interments here are getting a lot more popular and greater. And I guess along with that would be the natural burials as well. The other question I have is on 128, change policy for plot reservations. So obviously there's a problem with people reserving plot areas and maybe not, well, I'm not quite sure. What is the problem there? Why would we look at changing the policy for plot reservation?
We've got our cemeteries leader here, Mr. Weaver. Would you like to speak to that, Martin?
Welcome, Martin.
So there's not necessarily a major issue with the reservation of the plots. With the right council, we are in quite an enviable position to most authorities. We do have enough space. It's just the logistics of leaving a site with lots of reserved spaces. That is always an issue. If we, the land at Taraheru and the proposed opposite land as you were across the road in the future isn't too much of an issue. I don't see it being overly onerous on the council to have lots of reserved plots. It's some issues which some councils do address though, by changing the way that they will sell the plot and from in perpetuity into a deadline. It must be used by.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Is there a timeline when you reserve?
Not currently here.
Not at the moment. So that's where you might put monitoring in place and put some time restrictions on those times. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Can I, to the chair, the ash interment issue, there should be no issues. There's plenty of space for new ash burners to be created, and it's forecasted within the next year for that to be implemented. So there should be no issue there either.
It's needed a deadline.
More multi-purpose, then fees and charges need to reflect the shift. So can someone explain what a multi-purpose cemetery place is?
Through the chair, that actually came up in submissions as well, a number of the submissions around what does that truly mean. And I think there's some work for us to do around that in terms of giving the community confidence that it doesn't mean putting a speedway in or something like that around the cemetery. Whatever happens needs to be sensitive and consistent with the primary purpose. But it could be a leisure area where people go to relax or whatever, that is not specifically to do with grieving or visiting your loved ones. It could be for ecological purposes as part of an ecological connection, which actually ties in quite nicely with the natural burials process. But I think there is more work to do around just what that would actually look like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but they have reserve states at the moment, don't they? So there would be some protections around the sites.
That is true. So there are limits on what you can do in reserve land.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is a question that's troubled me for a while. Iwi, Hapu, Whānau have all got their own urupā and mostly have structures and trustees aside aligned to them. They maintain them, dig their own holes. Does council have any jurisdiction over any of these at all?
Weaver.
No, technically, under the Burials Act, we are only responsible for us to, as a council, to maintain our own sites. The Law Commission are going through a phase of review currently with regards to what the legal status on those land areas are. With that, there may be some changes. They still essentially hold a lot of responsibility. There is some indication that that may be devolved back to the districts and the regions. At this stage, it's still unknown. But all that we have to do under the Burials Act is to maintain an accurate record of who we inter upon our land that's designated as cemetery.
Just in case there's something else. Councillor Dunn?
I just want to follow on from the comment made to the Rongo Whakaata Trust submission. The point they're raising about Watson Park actually refers to the Waipawa land use, Waikanae to Waipawa land use project that we were doing. Have we advised them that we will be contacting them and looking for co-management in that space? That it doesn't really fit under the cemeteries?
I don't believe we have yet.
Supplementary, will we be doing that and advising them that there is a bigger project that covers Watson Park and that we will be looking to co-management at that point, just so they know that we do recognise their mana whenua status in that area? I just see that it fits better in that project than in cemeteries. And
as I understand it, the Waipawa to Waikanae project is in development phase, so they're considering how that project may roll out. So I'll definitely make sure that that's captured in there.
Document does show the comparison of the burying costs and that in different councils. And last time we discussed this, we did identify that we were very low. Would it be more transparent to put in the document that we have an intention to go to a specific different pricing rather than just have the indication that we're low? If there is that intention.
Yes, if council has that intention, it's going to have to go through a consultation process to implement that through its long-term plan. So that has an effect on the funding, council's funding policy. And then there's also the other issue that we have here, that the existing funding policy council doesn't actually meet in terms of cemeteries. So the ratepayer contribution to the cemetery activity is higher than what the 80-20 funding policy actually says it should be.
When the paper probably was written a while ago, but on page 129 talks about the recommendation to resolve the buried headstones under the Makaraka Cemetery, and I think some work's been done on that.
About the paper on Makaraka?
I know. Yeah. So this paper just needs to be updated.
All right, so we've got recommendation, page 46, note the contents of the report, all those in favour? All those against? Art and public places, page 144.
Kia ora, koutou. I'm happy to table the report as read and receive any questions as required.
I still haven't got clarity around the Art and Public Places Committee. That sort of seems to be a bit in limbo. Is there any work being done on what's happening with that committee? Do you know? It mightn't be your area, but...
through the chair, no further work on the Arts and Public Places Committee that I'm aware of. Stands as it is.
However, through the chair, in support of that question, Penny Walsh is here, who can probably just talk about how the Art and Public Places Trust Committee has been working and the value that it has been adding.
Yes, kia ora, Morena. Through the chair, the Art and Public Places Trust is not a committee, it's a trust. It's an independent charitable trust from which the council is the beneficiary of whatever they decide and choose to fund. That's examples are the Guardian, the Perspex looking sculpture in the main street, and they're currently working on a surfing one for around Roberts Road. So they decide on the object, raise the funds for the object, gift the object to council, and council covers the installation and maintenance from there on in. So it is not a committee of council, it's independent.
And is it more mobile during projects, I suppose?
Beg your pardon?
Is it more mobile during projects? Is it kind of once a project comes along, it really kicks into gear sort of thing? Or is it sort of something that you meet regularly anyway?
The ideas come from different places. For instance, the Wallen Dog statue idea came directly from the mayor, and they went on with that one. I think the surfing sculpture idea came from a member of the public, as did the Guardian one, which I think won a competition.
Thanks, Benny. Councillor Foster?
Recognition of this, and council had, their officers who were there at the time had agreed to put a concrete base and light in place. Nothing's happened. Every time I go to a community meeting, they give me a hard time about it. But it is, I think, officially on the Art and Public Places register with the Gisborne District Council. It's right in Ruatoria alongside the toilets. It's a massive carving. It's beautiful, actually. Yeah, but I'm just wondering operationally, and because this comes up regularly at the annual plan in Ruatoria community meeting, who is actually...
It sounds like from what Penny was saying that they are handed on to council, these art pieces, artworks, I think. So I would assume that...
Through the chair, I think that's something that we can look into. I do know that council has a schedule of art pieces and sculptures that it has responsibility for. Council does contribute to the installation of work that Art and Public Places Trust puts in around the foundations, the engineering elements of those art pieces. So we do have a schedule of items. I couldn't say now whether that particular piece is on that schedule, but we do have responsibility around the maintenance of those items that we have in our asset management plan.
Yeah, look, I really applaud the whole concept of art in public places. I mean, we've just seen all the new murals that have gone up around the place with sea walls, and there's other initiatives happening on private buildings around the place. Every time another piece goes up on a building, it's an icon, and you know, the longer they last, the more iconic they're going to be around the area. It just brings so much vibrancy to a town, you know, and so it's so good to see, and we should be encouraging as much of this as possible. Murals on buildings, artworks of public places, it's fantastic. I do have a question that the artwork that was going to be the surfboards at Roberts Road, could we have some progress on that? Has that been progressed at all? Or, we haven't heard much about it recently, but it's been on the go for quite a while. So,
well, through the chair again, it's an independent charitable trust, and we'll only know when they let us No, we do know that they have applied for a consent.
So it's still in the process and yes. And the other question I've got about council buildings could be considered for public art. You know, what kind of council buildings are we talking? Are we talking toilets? Is there any being identified as possible options at this stage?
Through the chair, no specific buildings at this stage. Obviously, it would be in a matter of council discretion to determine which buildings would be appropriate for those artist expressions. But for example, you could imagine some art installations around the library or even exhibitions within council offices, the administration building itself. That's reserved for council discretion to determine the appropriateness of, though.
Thank you. To follow on briefly from Councillor Foster's point about exhibiting art in the council buildings, I think that's just a matter for the people who are operating that facility. For example, the library. I don't think it needs a council or input into that or permission. We've got enough art in that's not displayed for council chambers at the moment, and gifts from from sister cities, for example, that aren't on display. So I think we've got a problem of curating our own art instead of other people's. Plus, we provide a museum to curate art for us. So I don't think it's something that we need to actively seek, is to put art into our other buildings. I was concerned when I saw page 168 that it mentioned developing accessible digital tools to communicate and coordinate creative activities, events and festivals, and promoting apps to add value to experiences, e.g. public art. I don't think that council should necessarily be developing those tools. Those are tourism and economic development tools, not for business. So I don't think that those should be in our policies for art. I also thought that the process provided in the appendix on 175, and this is the process to engage with council around artwork. It seemed like it was quite drawn out. I think that perhaps stage one should just be public deputation with a supporting paper so that we can hear directly from the artist or group involved and make a decision on whether we support and how we'd like to support. I don't think it necessarily needs to be drawn out over several stages. A good example is Seawalls, which just occurred. That came to council on a paper I presented, and we essentially made a decision on the day to support that and request Activate Te Rāwhiti help proceed with it. So I just want to make it as simple as possible for artists to get involved with arts and public places if possible, instead of having to be a drawn-out process. And then I guess the other thing I noted was the assessment tools are very broad, and essentially having so many different categories for assessment means that you'll always be able to shoehorn your concept into one of them. I think if we're going to assess it, we should just be assessing it on the merits of the presentation or the paper, and I don't think we can really refer back to such a long list of assessment tools. But I think the whole thing needs to be simplified, basically, just to be a decision based on whether we feel there is merit in the project.
Through the chair, just a question of clarification, Councillor. In regards to stage one for the decision-making process, you're referring to both appendices 1 and 2? Is that correct?
I think stage 2 is a little bit different, because it refers to Arts and Public Places Trust as if they are a body for temporary artworks, which isn't the case. They are they're a body for funding, you know, as has been identified. The Arts and Public Places Trust take projects of any type and will assist in the funding and delivery of such. So here we're discussing them as being part of the process for temporary artworks only is inconsistent with actually what they do. They should be part of the delivery process for any project, potentially permanent or temporary, if we see that that is the best mechanism for delivering that project. For example, the Seawalls project wasn't best delivered by Arts and Public Places Trust. It was, we found funding through Eastern Community Trust for them, and it was delivered very simply, essentially. Whereas Arts and Public Places Trust want to go through lotteries and various other funding avenues for artworks, which adds more time constraints, but is better for forward planning and to spread the burden of funding. So I think I think that those that the appendices are not consistent with actually how projects are delivered.
Through the chair, I'd just like to make a couple of comments in response to that. So we do have experiences with Art and Public Places, not the Trust, but Art and Public Places being developed without the proper due assessment work being done up front. So a rigorous process is not designed to make things difficult for applicants. It's actually designed to ensure that we get the necessary diligence done up front, whether that be around consents or engineering or whatever else might be required to make the art piece actually work. So I think it's important that we do have, not necessarily in this particular structure, but we have sufficient rigor around the decision-making process that actually the artist or the promoter of the art is able to achieve what they want to achieve. And you know, around Seawalls, for example, there were many, many discussions before that came to council, and that was actually a really good process where all officers were well engaged in that process. And that was actually why it was so straightforward when it did come to council, that we could actually turn it around quite smoothly.
I wrote that paper and I didn't have any correspondence with council staff before writing that paper. I brought it to the chair and it was voted on that day. So whilst in the background you have very good process and it may have been enacted, the way council made a decision to support it as a governance group was very straightforward. And I absolutely believe that you need good process in the background and not denying that. But yes, it was in that scenario, it was very different. And all I'm suggesting here is that this process adds stages to the governance decision, which may not be necessary. And it also puts Arts and Public Places solely in the scope of temporary artworks, where that, you know, the top line in that part. And that's not the case for Arts and Public Places Trust. They are not associated solely with temporary artworks.
It's getting tougher.
But I do think we have a responsibility.
Moved by Councillor Dowson.
good morning, and I think I would like to take the opportunity on behalf of the board and staff for the support of councillors and council staff over the past year. It's been a really fantastic year for the museum in terms of our museum visitation, which is the highest recorded since I can go back through the records and work it out. And I think it's been the first year where we've operated that free entry for local residents, which has been really well received. So it's great to see a very high satisfaction rating in the community facilities survey. It's wonderful that we get that feedback through that council work and tourism. You know, satisfaction levels from tourists. We did another survey this year, and that also came back with a really high satisfaction rate. So, so thank you all, because I think it's the partnership between council and the museum that makes it work. So thank you.
All right, thank you. The ministry bid, we don't want down because that's on a per head basis, isn't it? So it's from the next one.
No, so what that is, we actually, there's a little mistake in that summary, that covering report. We actually, we had about 2,500 more students than last year, and the funding is just the way that the Ministry of Education kind of provides the funding throughout the year. They moved 10% of it into the next financial year to receive the funding, so there hasn't been a reduction in funding, and it's just a timing issue, and it's on a fixed basis over a 3-year contract period.
But it's not held for the next 10 years or anything. It is reviewed every 3 years.
Yeah.
Just one question. Well done. The question is, have we, the council, kept up to our maintenance responsibilities?
No.
Good question.
Well, you have the opportunity to tell me or us.
I think it is taking too long to get this roof sorted. You know, we've got issues next year. If we're able to get time from the UK, we're not going to be able to present it properly without if we've got construction work being done. And if it comes out, it's going to be there for a year. We don't want to be part of the museum closed while we've got this extra, these items from the UK.
That is our big time pressure at the moment, that we know next summer is a really significant one for the museum and for the region. And with the projects and things we have planned, if we don't get the roof replaced before then the project has to, can't happen sort of next summer. It has to then, be in later years. So then the maintenance, issues continue to build, and some of the constraints around how we can operate continue as well. So
can staff give us the latest realistic expectations on the roof?
Through the chair, the Director Quarterly Report has the most up-to-date information with regards to the museum roof. Staff are working diligently to get the investigative information required in order to do an accurate design. So what we're doing is getting local contractors to provide the costing, the more accurate costing on what it would cost to do the roof replacement, as well as doing in-depth assessment underneath that membrane to determine the level of work that needs to be done on the framing. We're also, and what that will then do is inform the revised design. So we've got an external architect that's working hard on that and then doing that for council. Initially, the roof replacement was a roof replacement, but as we've delved more into the project, it's become a lot more than that. So there's 12 skylights that are in the roof that we need to look at rationalising. There's cladding that falls under the roof membrane that once you take that roof off, you're going to have to replace. Now, the initial cost for just the roof replacement was earmarked at 400K, but once we identified all that extra pieces of work that will need to be done, we're looking at having to do a funding application to make up that shortfall. So it's, we're working as hard as possible to get this done. but yeah, it's becoming a lot bigger than first anticipated. In terms of the timeframe, are you talking about construction or what's? Through the chair, our aim is to have it in place for the 2019 celebrations. That is what we're working towards. Yeah.
Completed.
Yeah.
So, construction would have to start when to have it completed?
We don't have.
Sorry,
that, we don't have that yet, but we expect to have that in the next few weeks.
Next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, it's been indicated that it's going to be more likely $1 million roof instead of a $400,000 roof. Just wondering, because that's a maintenance issue, is that something that's easily fundable? It seems like it's going to be very difficult to achieve funding for that, or is it within the scope of the agencies we apply to?
Through the chair, we will look to get funding from lotteries, from the Environment and Heritage Fund, and working with our funding and contracts advisor, we see that as a real viable option. But no funding applications have been put in place, and I believe their funding round opens in January.
I've got a different question. It's not related to the roof, but I'm very sympathetic about the roof and really disappointed that we haven't done our bit to get it up and running as fast as we possibly could. So hopefully that's going to happen by next year. My other question is, have you found a suitable location for the Cook statue of Titirangi? And if you have, where would it likely to be?
Well, we're working on it. I have had, since the decision at the last council meeting, I've met with council staff and others to kind of go through some of the logistics around, some of the practicalities of the sculpture to help form our plan. So, what's the condition it's in? How heavy is it? What are our options for display? So, as a museum, we have our own consultation processes, so I'm hesitant to say anything now before I've gone through that process with board and our stakeholders as the museum. But we're working on it, and for me, the key thing with the sculpture is to take the time to make sure that we have the storytelling and interpretation that sits around the sculpture right. So that's a real focus to me.
I just wanted to add to that on behalf of Councillor Wharehinga, who's not here today, but he had a fantastic suggestion that he posted on Facebook, which is that it was gifted to us by a brewery and should probably be displayed at the brewery. So it was. It seems like a great fit to me. But
May I just say something? If the roofing issue is really critical, and we know that there's a time frame around making applications to external funders, and I think I heard the executive officer saying that we'd be ready in January or February. But I hope we're looking at when the funding for those large grants is, because if we don't get on with it, and we should expect a report back to this committee reasonably soon about what really is required, because it will be quite a large. Look how long, and it's up to speed. It's not running late. But if you look at how long it's taken to change the roof on the Lawson Field Theatre, and it's coming along really well, and I think they're a week or so ahead of schedule, it's still been quite a few months since they first started working on the roof. So it is, and that is probably not a dissimilar project, because structurally underneath the roof there had to be some reconstruction and realignment so that the roof has different pitches to what it had previously, and not so many. So it's just that even with the best will in the world and people working to their time frame, not getting late, it still takes a long time. So we need to make sure we give it a level of urgency. Maybe this committee should have a report back at the next first meeting of the year of absolute time frames, please. Yeah, he did, but that's one application. We need.
Through the chair, just a few comments around this. I have some significant concerns around the roof. I have some significant concerns around our ability to deliver the roof for the celebrations next year. I'm putting my attention to it now, and I don't think it will be an issue to come back with some good detail around this project at the next committee meeting. I agree with you, Councillor Seymour. We've both been through a number of construction projects and we know how long and how complicated these elements and these projects can be. Mr. Blair is right that, and this committee would remember that we've been through quite an evolution around this project, from a small sum being allocated to the project in the previous LTP to an increase to $400,000 in this LTP, and further knowledge being gained as we go through this process. We have been in discussion with museum management around this for the whole time of that evolution, and it's behoven on us to keep the museum engaged so that they know where we are. So I think you're right, Councillor Seymour, a report back to the next committee around where we stand so that we can all think about where we're going to be for the future with this project.
Thanks for that. Moved by Councillor Dowsing, seconded by Councillor Fenn. Just a noting report on page 193, notes the contents of the report. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And while we've got the museum here, we'll go on to page 237, which is the museum relationship with council. Yeah, you look quite cosy there. Moved by Councillor Burdett, seconded by Councillor McLean. Anyone got anything on that? Nothing you want to add? Does seem a little bit outdated, so we do need to look at it. It's amazing how quickly things change.
Thank you. Yes, I raised this point and requested this paper come forward, and I think it is very much that point that the amount that council is putting into the museum annually is rapidly increasing, and when you take into account the maintenance costs on top, it seems like a very hefty investment. And I think it was identified in here that there was going to be that the museum is creating a 10-year plan, and that and discussing the relationships within that. So hopefully, an output from that will be to look at alternative funding models outside of just the council support, because I think that long term, it's unrealistic to continue that level of funding or that level of increase on top of the funding that's currently in place. And I absolutely support the museum, and I think it's without a doubt the best regional museum I've ever been to, and the exhibits I've been there are of national standard in my opinion. So I don't want to see any reduction in level of service. Just how we keep providing that level of service is my concern. So yeah, thank you very much for the report, and it identifies in there that hopefully those things will progress.
Thanks for that. Anyone else? No? Also just a noting report, page 237. We had moved by Councillor Dowsing, seconded by Councillor Foster. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Must be a cup of tea now. Welcome, Councillor Forahing. You'd be interested to note that Captain Cook's going down to the brewery.
to get this presentation. A number of committees will be receiving this presentation, probably not all, we just want to cover all councillors. So this is the committee Kōrero report, and the focus of this is around improving our committee reporting. It's something that councillors have been asking for some time. We've made a number of attempts at it over the years. What you've got in front of you, I think, is probably our best effort yet, but it is a test pilot for you that we're looking for feedback on. It's a statutory requirement that we do these reports, so they need to be as comprehensive and complete as possible for you to be able to fulfil your governance responsibilities. There's a lot of words here. I'm actually not going to talk to all of these words. The project's vision, Committee Kōrero project vision, is to bring together the right processes and systems to deliver quarterly reports that effectively inform you. So we provide activity updates. So what have we been doing? What are we working on? How are things progressing? How are our finances looking in terms of revenue expenditure, operational expenditure, capital expenditure? We don't report on major projects because they're being reported to the Future Parāwhiti Committee, but basically everything else in our activities we report through these reports in a comprehensive and relevant way. So the key is putting in the right information through the right systems to get the right material coming out for you, so you get what you need to be good governors. In reflection, all of these slides almost say the same thing. So the key thing is, I think you've all got a survey in front of you. If we can get some feedback from you around that today, and also to say informal feedback by email or talking to directors through this process is also really valuable, and we'll be taking into account as we work to improve this report. And that's basically it in a nutshell. Anything you want to add?
So what you're seeing today is phase one of the whole project. So obviously that feedback that you get is an opportunity for our performance team to take it back and further refine. So your feedback is gratefully appreciated. Are we on track? What needs to be improved? What have we missed? And obviously, as Andrew stated, we're working in a statutory guidance type approach as well. So we need to make sure we're ticking those boxes in terms of our performance reporting. So looking forward to hearing your comments.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment. I mean, for me, I thought it was really refreshing and very informative. I'm really quite happy with the new format. It's always, when you have a change of something, you're not quite sure what the outcome's going to be. But for me, I thought it gave me the information that I wanted. It really was easy. Yeah, so I really applaud the whole change so far. Yeah, so from my perspective, I think it's fantastic. Yeah? And congratulations. I realise there's been a lot of hard work behind the scene to get to this stage. There could be some tweaking to make it absolutely perfect, but that's life's never perfect, and you always should be looking at tweaking things to make them absolutely, but I'm really happy the way the progress has been made, and I think what you've done is fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah, just my questions in regard to the survey. It's the questions are referring to the committee report, but you're actually asking for specific feedback on the quarterly report in the committee report. Is this survey specifically for the quarterly report, or is it for our committee reports every month? Okay,
quarterly report.
on page 316, we mentioned about events, and I know in the past there has been some perception that, we don't, that the events don't, that, like when people are coming to us about organising events and everything like, there's different people they've got to deal with, and they're not finding it as easy as possible in the past. Now, I've raised this in the past before, but speaking to different event people recently, I know that they have encountered a lot more easier. So I'm just wondering, as a format for an event organiser coming to council for the first time with possible road closures and all that, has that been all addressed? Have we got the same person that people are dealing with? They're dealing with the right, everyone's interacting with each other, basically, because before there was a little bit of confusion and it wasn't cohesive. Yeah.
Through the chair, there's been Angela Stewart, who's in our comms team, is tasked with that activity, so to speak, and there's been a lot of templating and formalising processes as well, so applicants do have clarity on what's expected, and she is that point of contact for them. And obviously refinement as we go, but that's definitely... Yes, building those relationships. I don't think they're where we want them to be yet, but we're working on it, yes.
Question two, I think it's on page 318. What is a refresh of our branding? You're mentioning about a refresh of our branding. Can you describe what a refresh of our branding is? Is that an exercise of rebranding, or?
I understand that it's exactly that, a refresh, not a complete rebrand of our brand. It is a refresh, like getting consistency in colours across all our communications, all our templates. The website as well will be refreshed to reflect that. Yeah. Yes, so it's not a rebrand, it's a refresh.
Also on page 318, we've got the Youth Council there, and it says that the Youth Council are critically competent and driven, and they have a program of work which is clear and will stimulate youth involvement in council activities. As a committee, we're not that familiar with what's going on there, so I did suggest a couple of months ago that it'd be great to have them present to us and let us know what's happening in that space. Thanks. And the other one I had was the service levels, and it was to do with the pool. I mean, it's not a measure yet, but the target for the water quality is 90%. And as someone that's been swimming in the pool a lot, I would have hoped that would have been a bit higher, actually.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. That's a good point. That's what we have, what council has adopted through its LTP. It may be something that we do want on 100%. We achieve 100% or come very close to it most years. And the threshold for water quality is actually quite high for aquatic centres as well.
Thank you, Chair. On page 323 about the Endeavour replicas, it looks like we're still about $19,000 short. So the group that I'm involved with trying to push this and get it all organised for next year is that we're looking at going for a crowdfunding or give a little. And already we have sort of pledges up to about $5,000. So we feel now that that's probably the quickest way of getting the final figure. So then all we just do is go for our consents and get these replicas back up and functional in the city.
Just as an update, council's 19,000. We do have an anonymous donor for a further 10,000, and Malcolm's speaking about another 5,000 on top of that. So getting close. Yeah,
very close.
There was a suggestion that council could do the crowdfunding, but I don't myself think it's appropriate that council should start using crowdfunding. But as individuals, it's not a problem. Anything to add on the Endeavour, Garrett?
Through the chair, no, I believe you have covered it off in terms of the latest pieces of work that we've done on it. But further to that, I do just want to advise the committee that the community members that have been working diligently in the background have started doing some work around the measurements and initial sort of drawings of their own back, I suppose. So they're working in the background in terms of doing those pieces of work, which is cool.
Thank you. Through the chair, can I ask if we have a budget set for the website redevelopment and if that's been included in the LTP? Page 315. Currently has that we're project completion date for September 2019, so it's pretty ambitious. Page 315.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we have anybody in the meeting who can actually answer that question, but we can come back to councillors on what that budget is.
Great. The other comments I had were on design, so I'll put that into my survey.
Forward for that, because it says, funding's not been secured, as with Te Aroa. And, that playground has really been neglected for a long time, hasn't it, Councillor Burdett? Right, so I'll ask that question. Then my second point is about the area liaison officer on page 318 under challenges on the second box. I mean, that position has been neglected as well for quite some time, and they've been, apart from the first person that was in that position who was really, really effective and active, subsequently the positions have not been very sustainable, and it just seems like it's out of sight, out of mind, and nothing's been done about it. And I don't think it's necessarily needs to be a consequence of any outcome of the representation review, because the community will still live on the coast and still have the need for that area liaison officer from Gisborne District Council. But it's just like we don't seem to be, as if we don't care and we aren't doing anything about it.
As of last week, I was party to an approval for the advertisement of that role, so it should be going out shortly. So it has, while it has been, well, this was drafted a couple of weeks ago, that has been actioned as I understand it. So it should be out to market shortly to fill that role. Yeah, I think it's been trying to maximise even further than what that original person did, and making sure we're getting best bang for buck for the entire coast with that role. That's been considered.
Thank you for that.
I'm not going to wax lyrical. But say, Councillor Simmons put up as a real concern on the run last night by the Secretary of the Full Waikato to refer to the liaison group with Council, that there was a suggestion that the playground would be empty, all the gear taken away, and it would be left in abeyance until such a time as
Through the chair, I think it's only reasonable to respond on the playground question that's come up from more than one councillor today. So I'll start this off, but I'll hand over to Mr. Blair. I believe that my staff have been working quite hard, or actually very hard, in a number of communities on the coast around playgrounds. We know that a number of our playgrounds on the coast and in the city are actually in poor condition, not a lot less than we have had in the past. There's been a program of work to bring them up to a standard that we're happy with and meet the levels of the New Zealand standard that most communities would expect. There are still some that need some work. We have a limited budget in being able to do that, and hence that's why we're talking about external funding. But the value of the conversations that are going on in those communities is that we are planning with those communities around how these play spaces should be developed. And I think my team has been doing a fantastic job in engaging with the people who need to have input to that. But just in respect to the Ruatoria playground, Mr. Blair might like to make some further comment.
Through the chair, further to Mr. White's comments regarding the work that staff have done on coastal playgrounds, it's not council's appetite to remove any equipment in Te Puatinga Park at all. Actually, quite the contrary, we are wanting to spend money on maintenance to make sure that it is safe for the community to use, especially coming into the summer period and school holidays. We have a program of replacements that is dependent on funding. The funding application for that will be sometime early in 2019, which will look at replacing Te Araroa and Ruatoria. So there's a lot of work happening in this space. There's a lot of dialogue between council and community, and I feel that my staff have managed this process really well and have been 100% engaging with the community on the coast with regards to playgrounds.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In hearing criticisms, I mean, we must give some praise out there too. I went to the Waikirikiri playground opening the other week, and that is nothing less than absolutely fantastic. And sadly, for the rest of the district, they want nothing less than that. So well done. That was a good project, well carried out.
Just on page 316, ensure all non-iconic signage is bilingual and revitalise the entrance and exits to Gisborne Te Tarawhiti. Ongoing and a plan underway to change old signage, new signage catalogue and ordering process near completion. So the entrance ways are really important in our signage and everything, and it's something that when you go to a region can be really welcoming or can be a non-event. And our signage at the moment is appropriate, I guess, but it hasn't got that wow factor. Is our new signage, is it going to have that wow factor? Would we get an opportunity to see it before it goes up?
I think with signage, there's a number of factors. So there's the legal requirements around signage, obviously adjacent to state highways. There's a design component, and then it's how we're refreshing them when we consider them old and due for replacing. So in terms of wow, I can probably come back to you with what they might look like. I'll just find some certainty around what the wow component is expected to be for you.
Far be it for me to say something that would add money to it, but I think most of the wow factor entrance to cities is more than just signage. It's sort of gateway processes and sort of a styling sort of thing rather than what you do with the sign. So that's something that could possibly looked at in the future. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. And through the chair, we had this discussion before, but I just wanted to get clarity on Mr. White's desire. On page 306, it mentions that staff will prepare a funding application to secure the other $600,000 required for the museum roof project. And I was wondering if, to expedite the process, that you would like us to include that in the recommendations that we instruct Chief Executive to seek the additional 600,000, or whether that's going to be through a different body.
Thank you for the question. So lotteries doesn't require a council resolution. It's always helpful. I'd have to ask advice from our democracy support people whether a noting report could actually be amended to include a recommendation.
On that, then I'll move the paper with the recommendation that to instruct the Chief Executive to seek the additional $600,000. The reason I want to include that is because obviously we've discussed today that the process has already taken some time. The application needs to be in the January round, I believe, for lotteries. So we won't. We would have an opportunity at council to put that in place, but I don't think we'll be prepared in time a full report. So we may as well recommend it here. So yes, I'll put it into this paper. The wording can be taken from the previous paper that had a recommendation earlier today, Makaraka Cemetery. So yes, I'll add that. So yeah, I'll move it with that additional.
We won't know the amount at this stage. Does it matter? It's just a recommendation that, yeah.
It's indicating that they are preparing a funding application to secure the other 600,000 here. So
600,000. All right, thank you. All right, anything further? Okay, recommendation, note the contents of the report. Number 2. That's at the Makaraka Cemetery one.
Oh.
We just got the recommendation, which is pretty much the same as if you go to the Makaraka Cemetery. Oh, okay, yeah. So as instructed by Councillor Dowsing. Yep.
Instructs the Chief Executive to submit a funding application to the Lotteries Commission for up to 600,000 towards the cost of the roof project, whatever the appropriate term is.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Councillor Dowsing and Councillor Foster. 338. There's one that went to Tolaga Bay Beach 3 weeks ago and then went 2 days ago. I am amazed by how much they've been able to get off that beach. It's been extraordinary.
Got some slides to present, and I'll talk briefly through it, and if there's any discussion and questions, then happy to take them. There's no words on these slides, which is normally the way that I like to work. This is actually a really visual success, and I would premise it all to say that this is actually a forestry-led initiative, led principally by Hikurangi, and that's in light of their feeling of social responsibility and the percentage of the material on the Uawa Beach that is actually forestry material. So I'll just kick this off. So these are sort of before and after slides. So when I went to Tolaga Bay Beach, a couple of months ago, this is what it looked like, and you can see a lot of really big material. This is, of course, near the wharf. That big material tucked right under the wharf, right down to the end of the beach. It's not all new log material. Some of it's quite old, and when you've got really hard material and you've got soft material, actually dealing with it through chipping or mulching or whatever, it becomes more complicated. And actually, these piles were pretty much like this all along the beach as far north as the Uawa River mouth. On the northern side of the Uawa River mouth, the material was a little different, smaller material, probably more material mixed with sand, whereas this is sand mixed with woody debris. So it looks like it's piled up because it was piled up by forestry following the flooding event, because the focus was to try and get it out of the tide and demobilise it from a navigation perspective. Another before photo. There's 45,000 cubic metres of material on this beach from those floods, so significant amounts. And when you look at that and you're thinking about how do we deal with this, it's a pretty big ask. So this was from when I went up earlier this month, and that's what it looks like. So that big material has completely been removed. So that has all been burnt in the high heat fires. You can still see a little bit down under the wharf, but actually I think most of that is actually stuff that's already mobilised in the sea, and we will still see some material coming in over time. And that's looking north from that same point. Still small material there, but as the tide comes over, you end up with a relatively pristine beach again. They're working on the North Beach at the moment, so they've gone as far north on the South Beach as the Dotterel nesting area, just south of the river mouth, and they're not removing the material from the Dotterel nesting area for obvious reasons. So the focus on the North Beach now is around the surf club, and as of yesterday, they'd completed a 300-metre stretch of beach around the surf club.
Will there be a time when it will be, they'll be able to clean the Dotterel area as well after nesting, or are they there the whole time and you just want to stay right away?
I think the answer to that is that it's actually probably better to leave that material there. It will actually become part of the environment over time. The main value of what they're doing here is to make the beach available for the community and for visitors again, and that's actually not a high visitor area for the beach, so the impact is not so great there. May well do, yeah. So what you see here is that fan forced burning. That's a new fan that Sheldon has developed or purchased, and it's more effective than what they had originally. And I think that's really beneficial for the North Beach when you're talking about higher component of sand in the material than the South Beach. The value of having the ability to get more air in there actually keeps things moving at a good rate. It's another view of the North Beach with the work going on at the moment. Now that's a reasonably smoky looking fire. Probably not as smoky as one would expect, but what you get when you're starting up the fire and then if you're killing the fire when the sea breezes come on, you get a little bit more smoke at those points. Another photo of the North Beach, you see the smoke in the background there. We've installed signs there as well because there are some hazards particularly for small kids around those piles of debris that we wanted to give families good warning about. And that's the slide. So the challenge that the forestry industry faces around this burning is that it's really only useful when you've got offshore breezes. So we don't want to be blowing smoke over the city, and that's been closely monitored by Council's environment team. And the feedback that I've had, and I haven't seen a full written report on that at this point, but actually this activity is complying well with the equality expectations from the compliance team, and I expect there will be a report at some point to the Environment Committee around that. So it's actually a really good news story. Whether it's the best way to deal with forestry debris on the beach or debris on the beach, I think there's still some questions around, but in terms of a rapid response this year to what was a really big issue for that community, I think it's been really successful, and it's been really well brought into by the various stakeholders and the community there. Been really good engagement around it, and yeah, I think it's a really positive outcome from a point where it was really difficult to work out just what needed to be done there. So happy to take any questions.
No, not so much a question, compliments to Sheldon and his team. That beach is in better condition than before the flood, because there was a pile of logs there then.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, great initiative there. And my question is there been any monitoring done of all the other beaches up around the coast? You know, like Kaiawa, Waihau, you know, that are you know, all facing similar directions and possibly in a similar condition, but because they're not as high profile, I guess, as Tolaga Toko, you know, are they in a state of having a lot of debris, wooden debris all over them?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Te Kapa up near Rotorua has a huge amount of debris on it. We're probably talking about hundreds of thousands of cubic metres of debris there, and actually not the same high percentage of forestry material on that beach as well. There has been talk about debris at Kaiawa. I think that's mostly around the stream mouths. Yeah, not nearly to the same extent to what we've got at Uawa, and there have also been questions around Enoda Bay, but actually Enoda Bay is in really good nick from what we see. So we did do an early assessment around all the beaches in terms of volumes and types of material. Uawa Beach was the biggie in terms of visitation impact and sheer volumes of forestry material on it.
The other question I've got is, has council ever been advised of an island of wood off the East Cape that is huge with wooden debris? It's almost like an underwater island. I know there's some fishermen that have been commenting about it, and it's you know, it's got huge concerns for safety in the ocean. But I'm just wondering if council has ever been advised of it as yet. I'm talking, you know, 5 kilometres is huge, absolutely huge, with wooden debris. It's just sitting out in the ocean.
I'm not aware of any formal report coming to council about that. I certainly haven't seen a formal report, but as you have heard, I have heard those comments as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. To the chair, you've mentioned how successful this has been at the beach. Can I ask 2 questions about that? And that's what happens to the ashy waste? Is that taken away, or is it mixed with the sand? And the other thing is would this be a potential process for removing the wood at source instead of at the beach? You know, is it something that they're considering for doing at the slash site instead of at the beach? But I don't know if it's safe to burn up in those environments, but.
Well, I can answer the question about the ash. The consent requirement is that ash is being monitored for composition, but that it gets buried on the beach. And in terms of the other question, I can't answer that, I'm sorry. Yeah, certainly it creates less ash. It's effectively potash, we understand, and of course it also creates less contaminants in the emissions as well.
Councillor Whare.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. So in regards to Te Kapa, is there a plan for that slash there at the moment?
No, there's no current plan to remove that.
Is there are we going to be removing it? So I acknowledge that there's no current plan. Is there an intention to create a plan to remove that, the slash off there?
No, not at this stage.
I think that that's something that we should look to do, because that immediately after that, the focus was on Tolaga and Toko, but also there were a lot of community members up in Ruatoria who had taken pictures of Tikapa Beach immediately afterwards, and I was shocked at how bad that beach was for where it was. I think that we actually have an obligation to have those conversations with forestry in order to get that cleared. My second question is, I wanted to know, do we have any indications of it's kind of in line with what Councillor Foster was saying, do we have any indications as to how much debris is still in the sea? And are we having conversations with forestry about the removal of that slash that comes out from steadily from the sea tune? I mean, it was put out there from the big flash flood. It's not going to suddenly all of a sudden, be a big flash kind of onto the beach, surge into the beach. It will come in kind of steadily over time. So that's two questions. Do we have an indication as to how much is out there? And two, are we having those conversations with forestry about their continuing effort to clear those beaches?
Through the chair, as I said before, around the material that's still mobilised in the sea, I've heard comments about that. I haven't seen anything formal and comprehensive around that, so I can't really say anything more than that at this point. It is something that is on the radar, not necessarily for this committee, but something on the radar in terms of future involvement around beach clearing. I think there are other discussions that will be going on around what's the more sustainable approach to managing material that comes down the rivers, or even stopping it coming down the rivers.
Oh, that's great to hear about the forward management of stuff coming down the rivers. I think that we should be also holding forestry to account for the other stuff that will be coming out of the ocean that was placed there from that initial surge down those rivers out into our oceans. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, some of us went on a forestry trip recently, and in all fairness, forestry are actually doing a really good job. I know we bag forestry and stuff, but they're actually doing a really good job about thinking of future slash and stuff on the hills, which is, I think, fantastic. And up until now, some of that's been out of their control, but just like to say that, yeah, they are doing some really innovative and research around how they can stop this happening in the future.
This methodology that has been successful at Tolaga Bay, can we use it in town when we get all the slash turning up on the town beach? Rather than shifting it down the beach and creating the problem somewhere else?
Yes, potentially. So the methodology that we use at the moment for the town beaches is that it gets moved to dunes further down the beach and filling in depressions in those dunes, but that's actually in the long term not a sustainable solution. So this may actually be a good option for the future. The best option in my view would be if we didn't get that material on the beach in the first place.
My next question, the final paragraph on page 338, where it says alternative methods for managing the slash for future events. We need to be looking at this from a regulatory perspective and actually tackling it at source, because clearly at the moment the regulations we have in place aren't containing the slash where the problem is being generated. So it'd be really nice to see us do the pincer manoeuvre and tackle it from both perspectives and not just be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I don't like dealing with future events. I like to think that we're being proactive in trying to fix it further upstream rather than...
Could I suggest that we make a recommendation to council to investigate the claims of this slash island off the East Cape? I mean, it's something that could be is catastrophic at the moment, submerged huge logs out in the water, huge noise swell. The whole coast is actually quite vulnerable. And what I've heard, the stories I've heard are actually frightening. So, I mean, someone needs to kind of take the bull by the horns and actually start looking at this and investigate. It's just a helicopter ride or something out to that particular point. But I would suggest that we need to fuel this conversation and maybe with a recommendation to investigate, we get some outcomes from it. Because the problems could be huge from this. Could actually be just catastrophic for all our beaches.
Have you got something on that, Councillor Seaman? Yeah, thank you.
I was going to say, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say before that Councillor Boatinger is on EPNR this afternoon, and it would be entirely appropriate to raise it with Mr. Zaman this afternoon. But I can't help thinking, if it's that valid, why hasn't it been raised by those who have seen it with Gisborne District Council rather than just spoken about? But it's entirely appropriate to raise it with Mr. Zaman, and this council has done helicopter flights looking at issues, hasn't it, Mr. White? So I'm sure that can be pursued. We'll give an undertaking to raise it this afternoon.
Heather was suggesting that it's added to the action sheet, but maybe more appropriate this afternoon.
Oh,